On the afternoon of the 15th of July, 2020, the most followed accounts on the internet began saying the same thing at the same time. Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Apple. One after another, the biggest accounts on the platform were seized. From many of them, the same short message went out, promising to double any Bitcoin sent to a certain address. It was a scam, and for a few hours it came from the largest voices on the internet. The company behind them was worth about $37 billion. And yet, according to the New York State Department of Financial Services, the people who seized those accounts did not use malware. They did not use a software exploit. They did not use a backdoor. They used a telephone. This is the story of how a handful of phone calls reached the master controls of a global platform, and what investigators concluded had been left unguarded. This is Findings of Fact. The truth leaves a paper trail. Let's follow it. Findings of Fact. In July 2020, Twitter, then one of the most influential communication platforms in the world, lost control of its own master tools. 130 accounts were targeted in a Bitcoin scam that played out in public in a single afternoon. New York State's financial regulator investigated and published its findings that October. This episode follows that official record, tracing how a few phone calls defeated a $37 billion company and how a vacant security seat, broad internal access, and a phishable second factor made it possible. The platform and the master key. To understand what went wrong, you first have to understand what the attackers were reaching for. Twitter, in 2020, was a place where a short message could travel to millions of people in seconds. Politicians used it, companies used it, emergency services used it. In early 2019, the platform averaged over 330 million monthly users. By the middle of 2020, it averaged over 186 million daily users, and nearly 1 in 5 of those were in the United States. More than half of American adults, the report notes, get their news from social media at least some of the time. That reach is not just social, it moves money. The report reminds us that in 2013, hackers took over the Associated Press account and falsely tweeted that explosions at the White House had harmed the president. In the minutes that followed, the S&P 500 index lost more than $136 billion of value before the tweet was exposed as false. A single trusted account saying one untrue thing was enough. Keep that in mind, because it is the reason a regulator cared about a social media company at all. Behind that public surface, Twitter ran a set of internal account management tools. These were not visible to ordinary users. They were built for the company's own support staff. With them, an authorized employee could look up an account's private details, including its email address, its phone number, and the location it logged in from. They could change that email address. They could reset a forgotten password. They could turn an account's extra security off. They could even limit what an account was allowed to post. Think of that as a master key. Not a key to one door, but a key that could open any account on the service. The report is blunt about what that access meant. Investigators found that with these tools, a person could take over any account on the platform. The master key is only safe if 2 things are true. Very few people can hold it, and the lock is hard to pick. Hold on to those 2 ideas. The whole story turns on them, and by the end you will see that neither one held. A house full of open doors. Before the first phone call was ever placed, the New York regulator found the ground was already unstable. The first problem was at the top. Twitter had not had a chief information security officer since December of 2019. That is the senior executive whose job is to own cybersecurity for the whole company. For the 7 months leading up to the hack, that seat was empty. Investigators noted that a lack of strong leadership is a common source of cybersecurity weakness, and that the absence of such a leader sends a message that security is not a top priority. The second problem was the master key itself. Twitter did limit who could use the internal tools, but investigators found that, before the hack, over 1,000 employees still had access to them. Over 1,000 people held a key that could open any account on the platform. Now, some access is necessary. Support staff have to do their jobs. Someone has to reset the passwords of locked-out users, review reported content, and enforce the platform's rules. That is real work, and it needs the tools. But the more people who hold a master key, the more targets an attacker has to choose from, and the harder it is to notice when one of those keys is misused. Every additional person with the key is another person who can be phoned and fooled. After the hack, Twitter sharply cut the number of employees with that access, even though it slowed down some of the company's work. The report treats that as telling. The narrower access was possible all along. It simply had not been treated as urgent, because the seat responsible for making that call had been empty for months. There was a third condition, and it had arrived only a few months earlier. In March of 2020, like much of the world, Twitter had sent its workforce home, the pandemic, and the perfect pretext. When Twitter moved to remote work, its employees started connecting to the company's systems through something called a virtual private network, a VPN. It is an encrypted tunnel that lets someone working from home reach the internal network as if they were in the office. The sudden shift to working from home put a strain on that system. VPN problems became common. Employees were used to having trouble connecting and used to calling for help when they did. That ordinary frustration became the perfect cover story. In social engineering, the false story an attacker tells is called a pretext. A good pretext is one the victim already half expects to hear. And by the summer of 2020, a call about VPN trouble was exactly the kind of call a Twitter employee expected. Investigators also noted this was a known and rising danger. Between January and July of 2020, roughly 1/3 of the significant cybersecurity incidents reported to the department involved phishing or its telephone cousin. This was not a rare or exotic method. It was, that year, one of the most common ways attackers got into any network at all. And in April, the department had issued guidance warning about the heightened cybersecurity risk that came with the shift to remote work. The report's finding is pointed. Twitter did not put significant new protections in place after that shift. The warning existed. The risk was documented. And the compensating controls, the extra measures you add precisely because the ground has shifted beneath you, did not arrive in time. There is a broader lesson buried here, and the report returns to it more than once. Attackers do not usually break in through the front door of your strongest defenses. They wait for the moment your circumstances change, when a new habit becomes routine before the safeguards around it catch up. Remote work was that moment. The VPN call was that habit, the phone calls. Here is how the report describes the attack beginning on the afternoon of the 14th of July. One or more attackers called several Twitter employees. They claimed to be from the help desk in Twitter's own IT department. They said they were responding to a problem the employee was having with the VPN. This is a technique called vishing, which is simply phishing carried out over the phone, by voice. The callers were convincing because they had done their homework. Investigators found the attackers had gathered basic information about Twitter and its staff, enough to sound like insiders, enough to name the right systems and use the right words. Then came the trap. The caller directed the employee to a website. It looked identical to Twitter's real VPN login page, and it lived at a web address that looked almost the same. The employee, believing they were fixing a VPN problem, typed in their username and password, but that page was fake. It was controlled by the attackers. And here is the crucial step. As the employee typed their credentials into the fake page, the attackers immediately typed those same credentials into the real Twitter site. Now Twitter had a second layer of defense, multi-factor authentication. When someone logs in, the system sends a prompt to that person's phone, asking them to confirm that the login is really them. The idea is that even if a password is stolen, the thief cannot get past this second check. But watch what the real-time relay does to that defense. When the attackers entered the stolen credentials into the real site sent a genuine confirmation prompt to the employee's phone. From the employee's point of view, they had just typed their password, so a confirmation request seemed completely normal, and so some of them confirmed it. They approved the attacker's login, believing it was their own. That is the heart of the failure. The second factor was not broken by clever code. It was defeated by asking a trusting person to press approve at exactly the right moment. The report is careful on one point, and so are we. Investigators found no evidence that any Twitter employee knowingly helped the attackers. Some employees even reported the suspicious calls to Twitter's internal fraud team, but at least one believed the story, and one was enough to begin, from a foothold to the master key. The first employee the attackers fooled did not actually have the master key. That employee's access did not include the internal tools that could take over accounts. In many organizations, that would be a saving grace. The principle behind it has a name: least privilege. It means giving each person access only to what their specific job requires, and nothing more. If the first person compromised cannot reach the crown jewels, the attacker is stuck. But the attackers were not stuck, because a foothold is not the same as a dead end. Using that first access, they moved through Twitter's internal websites. They rid the company's own internal pages, describing how to reach other systems. In effect, they used Twitter's own documentation to draw themselves a map. The next day, the 15th of July, they used that map. They targeted employees who did have access to the powerful tools, including some staff in the group responsible for handling sensitive global legal requests. This step, moving from a low-value foothold to a high-value target inside the same network, is what security professionals call lateral movement. Once they reached an employee with the internal tools, the attackers finally had the master key. And at first, they did something quiet with it. They went after short, valuable usernames, the single word or single character handles prized by early users. These are known in certain corners of the internet as OG accounts, from the slang for original, because they are seen as markers of status. A coveted handle can be sold for thousands of dollars. Between roughly 3 and 10 in the morning, the report says, the attackers discussed the takeover and sale of these usernames for Bitcoin, and Twitter confirmed that several accounts were compromised in the process. So the first use of the master key was not the famous scam at all. It was a quieter, older kind of theft, selling access to valuable names. That matters because it shows the intrusion was already well underway and already profitable before anyone outside noticed. But quiet did not last. Just before 2 in the afternoon, they began tweeting screenshots of the internal tool itself from the accounts they had seized, showing the world exactly what they could reach. The demonstration was about to become a robbery, the scam, and the response that mattered. At about 2:16 in the afternoon, the attackers hijacked the account of a well-known cryptocurrency trader and posted a request for Bitcoin. Then they escalated. They moved to the accounts of cryptocurrency companies. At around 3:18, the account of the exchange Binance. Then, in under an hour, roughly 10 more crypto-related accounts, including Coinbase, Gemini, and Square. And then they went for the largest voices on the platform. Between about 4:17 and 6:05 in the evening, the scam went out from accounts belonging to Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Kanye West, Kim Kardashian West, Joe Biden, Warren Buffett, and companies like Uber and Apple. The message was always the same: send Bitcoin to this address and you will get back double. Some accounts sent it more than once to reach more people. In all, 130 accounts were targeted. 45 were used to tweet. For up to 36, the attackers opened the private message inbox, including that of an elected official in the Netherlands. For 7, they downloaded the account's entire archive of data, and through the scam, they stole approximately $118,000 worth of Bitcoin. Twitter's own response, meanwhile, was slow and public. The company first became aware of suspicious activity that morning when employees reported the strange calls. But its incident team was still investigating when the takeovers of the crypto company accounts began in the afternoon. It was hours before they expelled the attackers, and to do it, Twitter took drastic measures. It cut off many verified accounts from tweeting at all and locked accounts whose passwords had recently changed. For a time, that meant real institutions could not speak. The report notes that the National Weather Service was unable to tweet a tornado advisory, and that even the department's own account went dark for several hours. To regain control, Twitter eventually required employees, starting with its chief executive, to change their passwords one by one, on camera, in front of a supervisor. But here the report tells a second story, and it is the one investigators clearly wanted remembered. The cryptocurrency companies that New York regulates did not fail. They reacted within minutes. At about 6:59 that evening, the department instructed the companies to block the attackers' Bitcoin addresses if they had not already. They had, in large part, already begun. Coinbase blocked roughly 5,670 attempted transfers, worth about $1.3 million. Square blocked 358, Gemini blocked 2, Bitstamp blocked 1. Taken together, the regulated firms blocked over 6,000 attempted transfers, worth roughly $1.5 million. The losses that slipped through in the minutes before blocking came to about $22,000, a fraction of what was stopped. The contrast is the whole point. One system, self-regulated, held a master key that over 1,000 people could use and could not stop the theft for hours. Another system, built to a regulator's requirements, saw the danger and slammed the doors in minutes. The report treats that difference not as luck, but as the product of controls that were required in advance. What was left unguarded, and what changed? When investigators laid out what would have stopped this, none of it was exotic. First, access. If far fewer people had held the master key, the attackers would have had fewer targets to fish, and misuse would have been easier to spot. The report calls for access to critical functions to be limited to those who genuinely need it and recertified regularly. Second, the second factor. Twitter used an app-based prompt, the kind you approve on your phone. That is common, and it is far better than nothing. But it can be defeated by tricking a person into approving it, which is exactly what happened. Investigators pointed to a stronger option, a physical security key, a small piece of hardware you plug in, which will only authenticate the genuine website. That kind of key, the report states, would have stopped the attackers, because it cannot be fooled by a lookalike page. Twitter moved to adopt it. Third, monitoring. It is not enough to control who holds the key. You also have to watch how the key is used. A strong monitoring system collects records from across a company's systems, looks for patterns that do not fit, and raises an alarm when something looks wrong in near real time. Investigators concluded that a robust monitoring program would have detected the unusual activity in near real time as it was happening, rather than only after the scam tweets were already public. Good monitoring turns a silent break-in into a ringing alarm. Twitter's did not ring in time. Notice what all three of these have in common. None of them is about being smarter than the attacker. Least privilege, hardware keys, and monitoring are all ways of assuming that someone, somewhere, will eventually be fooled, and limiting what happens when they are. The report's underlying argument is that resilience does not come from expecting people to be perfect. It comes from designing systems that survive people being human. And there was a broader argument. The department concluded that a company this important to public communication had in effect been regulating itself, with no dedicated cybersecurity regulator watching over it. It recommended that the largest social media companies be designated as systemically important and overseen the way critical financial institutions are. That was a recommendation, not a law that followed, and it is fair to say the debate it opened is still unsettled. As for the people who did it, in late July of 2020, the Department of Justice charged two men, Mason Shepherd and Nima Fazili, and referred a juvenile to state prosecutors in Tampa. That teenager, Graham Ivan Clark, 17 at the time, was prosecuted in state court precisely because he was a minor, and in March of 2021 he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years, followed by probation. In 2023, a British man, Joseph O'Connor, was sentenced to 5 years for a range of cybercrime offences that included his role in the hack. That same year, Nima Fazili pleaded guilty in federal court and was sentenced to a year of unsupervised probation. For Mason Shepherd, the public court record shows the charge and no final outcome. But the lasting finding is not about any one of them. It is that a global platform's most powerful controls were reachable by a phone call. Because too many people held the key, the lock could be picked by a trusting hand, and no one was watching closely enough to notice in time. The attackers were, in the report's own description, unsophisticated. That is what should worry us most. This has been Findings of Fact. Thanks for watching. Every source is linked in the description if you want to dig deeper. If we got anything wrong, let us know in the comments. We'll pin the correction. And subscribe so the next investigation finds you. Or keep watching. The next one's on screen now.